In the summer of 1997, a highway patrol officer in Oklahoma pulled over on a desolate stretch of Route 75 after noticing an abandoned sedan on the shoulder. At first glance, it looked like another broken-down car, maybe someone just needed a tow. But when the officer stepped closer, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The driver's side door was wide open, the keys were still dangling from the ignition, and a pair of shoes sat neatly placed in front of the car, as if someone had taken them off deliberately before stepping into the night. But the most disturbing part? Inside the car, on the front seat, was a single Polaroid photograph. It showed a young woman tied to a chair, duct tape across her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. On the back of the photo, scribbled in rushed handwriting, were the words, "This is just the beginning." This chilling discovery would become the opening thread in a tangled web of murders, disappearances, and cryptic messages that stretched across multiple states, baffled investigators, and left entire communities living in fear. And here's the thing, even after decades, many of the answers remain hidden in plain sight, leaving us to wonder if the killer, or killers, are still out there, watching. Backhand index pointing right before we dive deep into this story, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because I bring you chilling mysteries like this one, always. The scene of terror. The car was registered to a man named David Lorne, a 42-year-old traveling salesman. He was nowhere to be found. His family reported that he had left Tulsa 2 days earlier on a routine business trip but had never returned home. Strangely, his briefcase and wallet were still inside the vehicle. The photograph was sent immediately to the state crime lab, and within hours, the FBI was called in. They feared what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say out loud. This wasn't just a missing persons case, it looked like the beginning of something much darker. When the Polaroid was enhanced, investigators noticed tiny details in the background. A floral curtain, a chipped piece of wallpaper, and a clock stuck at 3:15. These details suggested the picture had been taken in some kind of home, but the exact location was impossible to pin down. Even more disturbing, the young woman in the photo was not David Lorne's wife, daughter, or anyone in his family. In fact, she didn't match any missing persons reports at the time. Whoever she was, she had seemingly vanished off the map. The domino effect. Over the next 3 months, more abandoned vehicles began showing up along highways in Texas, Arkansas, and Kansas. Each vehicle contained a Polaroid, each showing a different victim in distress. Some tied up. Some blindfolded. Others gagged. Always with the same ominous handwriting scrawled on the back. "This is just the beginning." The press went into a frenzy. People started calling the unknown perpetrator the photographer. Parents warned their children not to travel alone. Truckers kept their CB radios on full blast, listening for any hint of where he might strike next. And yet, law enforcement was utterly stumped. The victims in the photos remained unidentified. The cars they were found in belonged to completely unrelated people. The only thing linking the cases together was the handwriting, the same jagged scrawl that appeared across every single Polaroid. A breakthrough that made things worse. Then, in late October, a hunter deep in the woods outside McAlester, Oklahoma, stumbled across something that would turn this case from bizarre to bone-chilling. At the base of a dried creek bed, partially covered by leaves and branches, lay a metal lockbox. Inside were dozens of Polaroids. Some showed people alive, bound and gagged. Others were far more graphic, depicting lifeless bodies posed in eerie, almost theatrical positions. And tucked among these photographs was something even more sinister, a folded map with 3 towns circled in red ink. The towns were in 3 different states. And within weeks of this discovery, each of those towns would report an unsolved murder. It was now clear, this wasn't just one killer. This was an orchestrated pattern, maybe even a group, operating with meticulous planning and chilling precision. The victims speak in silence. Investigators tried desperately to identify the victims in the photos, but for months they kept hitting dead ends. Then one day, a woman in Dallas came forward. She claimed one of the victims was her younger sister, who had gone missing after a night out with friends 6 months earlier. But here's the detail that kept detectives awake at night. Her sister had never been reported missing. The family had assumed she had run away, maybe started a new life somewhere. No police file, no formal search. It was as if the killer was deliberately choosing people who could vanish without leaving behind immediate alarm bells. If that was true, then the killer was not just smart. He was studying his prey. Backhand index pointing right if you're hooked by this mystery so far. Drop a comment below with your theory. Do you think this was one killer, or a group working together? The phone call. In early 1998, nearly a year after the first abandoned car, police in Wichita received a phone call that would send a chill down the spine of every investigator on the case. The caller spoke only one sentence before hanging up. "You've seen the pictures, but you'll never see me." The number was traced to a payphone outside a gas station, but security cameras showed nothing unusual. No clear image of the caller. No usable fingerprints. Just a voice, calm, confident, and taunting. It was the killer, or killers, letting everyone know they were always one step ahead. By the end of that year, more cars appeared, more Polaroids were found, and more communities were terrorized. The case grew colder and stranger with every passing month. People stopped asking if the photographer would strike again and began to wonder when. And yet, through all of this, a terrifying question remained unanswered. Were these photographs trophies of murders already committed, or warnings of what was still to come? The cracks in reality. In early 1999, FBI analysts working on the case started to notice something that made them question everything. At first, they thought the abandoned cars and Polaroids were random, cruel games by a sadistic individual. But when the photos were laid out in chronological order, something chilling emerged. The backgrounds in the images, when pieced together like a puzzle, seemed to form a sequence, as if the killer wanted investigators to see them in a specific order. One picture showed a victim tied to a chair beside a cracked wall with peeling yellow paint. The next showed a different victim, but behind them was the same wall, this time with the crack extending further, as though time had passed between shots. It was as if the killer wasn't just documenting random abductions. He was telling a story through his victims. The stage theory. A special task force began to call this phenomenon the stage theory. They believed the killer was using real human beings to create a narrative, each photo a twisted scene in his performance. But if that was true, what was the story he was trying to tell? One profiler suggested it might be an allegory, a play on morality or sin. Another argued it was simply the work of someone desperate for control, turning people into unwilling actors in his own theater of horror. And then came the most disturbing theory of all. What if the photographs weren't just staged? What if they were warnings? The witness who shouldn't exist. One evening, police in Wichita got an anonymous letter. Inside was a single Polaroid of a man bound to a chair, his head slumped forward. On the back was written, "He saw too much." 2 days later, authorities identified the man as Gerald Banks, a local electrician who had disappeared on his way home from work. But here's where things get even darker. Neighbors claimed Gerald had been ranting in the weeks before his disappearance, saying he had seen something he wasn't supposed to. According to one neighbor, Gerald had been driving down Route 75 months earlier when he saw a man standing next to a parked car at night. The man was holding a camera, snapping photos of something in the ditch. Gerald slowed down, curious, and that's when the man turned, locking eyes with him. The next day, Gerald told friends he felt like he was being followed. He kept his curtains drawn, refused to go out at night, and even considered buying a gun. But before he could, he vanished. And now, his image had shown up among the killer's collection. The cryptic map returns. Investigators re-examined the lockbox found in the woods months earlier. The map inside had 3 towns circled, each followed by a murder. But in the bottom corner, nearly overlooked, was something far more ominous, 4 small numbers etched faintly in pencil, 4, 8, 12, 16. At first, agents thought it was nothing. But when they compared the numbers to the Polaroids, they realized the sequence aligned with the order of the photographs, almost like chapters in a book. If 4 meant the 4th photo, 8 the 8th, and so on, then it suggested the killer wasn't acting randomly. He was counting down to something. But what? The family torn apart. In Arkansas, another Polaroid surfaced in a car belonging to a young woman named Anna Grace. Unlike the others, this one shook investigators to their core. In the photo, Anna was sitting in a chair, gagged, with terror in her eyes. But standing just behind her, barely visible in the shadows, was a man. For the first time, one of the Polaroids actually showed the suspected killer. His face was blurred, either by accident or design, but you could make out his outline. Tall, lean, and unmistakably deliberate in the way he stood. Anna's family pleaded for her safe return, but weeks passed with no sign of her. Then, 3 weeks later, her body was found in an abandoned farmhouse outside Little Rock. And here's the part that shattered everyone: pinned to her chest was another Polaroid. This one showed her smiling, alive, clearly taken weeks before her abduction. The message was clear. The killer had stalked her long before she vanished. Backhand index pointing right. If you were Anna's family, what would terrify you more, the fact that she was murdered, or the fact that the killer had been inside her life long before anyone noticed? Comment below your thoughts. The journal. During the investigation into Anna's death, detectives uncovered a battered leather-bound journal hidden beneath the floorboards of the farmhouse. Inside were disturbing sketches, stick figures bound in chairs, eyes crossed out, mouths taped shut. But more than that, there were fragments of words scrawled in the margins. They don't see. The curtain never closes. Every ending is the beginning of another act. The handwriting matched the Polaroids. This was their first real link to the killer's mind, and it painted a picture of someone who saw his crimes not as murders, but as performances. The copycat theory. As the case spread nationally, other crimes began surfacing that seemed eerily similar. Polaroids found in abandoned houses, strange notes left behind, missing persons reports skyrocketing. But the FBI quickly realized some of these weren't connected. They were copycats, people mimicking the original photographer's methods, either for attention or to confuse the investigation. This made things infinitely more difficult. Investigators were drowning in fake leads, unsure which photos were real and which were staged by sick opportunists. And yet, buried among the chaos, one lead stood out. The motel room. In Kansas City, police responded to reports of a foul smell coming from a roadside motel. Inside one of the rooms, they found the decomposed body of a young man. But on the nightstand, untouched by decay, was a Polaroid camera. Next to it was a stack of undeveloped film. When the film was processed, investigators were horrified. It showed images that connected directly to the original lockbox, victims posed in the same way, staged with the same eerie attention to detail. But here's the twist: the dead man in the motel room was not the photographer. He was one of the victims. Which meant someone had deliberately left him there, along with the film, as if planting evidence. And the scariest part? One of the undeveloped photos showed a victim that had not yet been reported missing. It was a glimpse into the future. By the end of 1999, the case had spiraled into near madness. Investigators were chasing countless leads, unsure who to trust, and haunted by the possibility that the killer was orchestrating everything like a conductor of chaos. The Polaroids were no longer just evidence. They were a language, a narrative, and law enforcement was struggling to keep up. But just as the year closed, a discovery would shake everything to its core. A box arrived at the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. This time, it wasn't of a random victim. It was of one of the lead FBI agents on the case. Bound. Gagged. Eyes wide in terror. And across the back, in the same handwriting as always. The final act begins soon. The box that changed everything. When the FBI opened that package containing the Polaroid of one of their own agents, panic ripped through the task force. The photo showed Special Agent Daniel Cross, a 15-year veteran of the Bureau, known for his calm under pressure. He had been assigned to the photographer case for over a year. But the photo showed him bound and gagged, his eyes wide with unmistakable terror. The problem? Daniel Cross was alive. He was standing right there in the briefing room when the photo was unveiled. The agents stared at him in silence, the air thick with unease. The Polaroid was not a photograph of something that had happened. It was a photograph of something that might happen. This revelation shattered the already fragile line between reality and performance. Were the Polaroids depictions of past crimes, staged recreations, or chilling predictions of the future? The timeline theory. The numbers scrawled in the lockbox, 4, 8, 12, 16, took on new meaning. Analysts began to wonder if they represented not just the order of photographs, but the killer's timeline. The chilling possibility emerged: every fourth photo marked a critical event in the story the photographer was telling. If that theory was true, then the photo of Agent Cross wasn't random. It was part of the countdown. In whatever final act the killer was orchestrating, it was approaching fast. The betrayal from within. Weeks later, the FBI got a disturbing lead. One of their lower-level analysts, a 27-year-old named Henry Miles, suddenly disappeared. At first, it looked like a burnout case. But when they searched his apartment, they discovered something shocking. Pinned to his walls were copies of the very Polaroids that had been kept under lock and key inside FBI headquarters. Even more disturbing, Henry had been keeping his own notes, scribbling cryptic phrases similar to the journal found at the farmhouse. He shows us what we refuse to see. Every scene is a confession. The stage will collapse when the audience finally listens. Was Henry just another obsessed copycat, or was he feeding information directly to the photographer? His sudden disappearance suggested the latter. And when his car was later found abandoned on Route 75, with yet another Polaroid inside, the Bureau realized the killer had infiltrated their investigation from the inside. The survivor. For years, investigators believed every victim in the Polaroids had either vanished permanently or been killed. But then, in 2000, something unprecedented happened. One of the supposed victims turned up alive. Her name was Rachel Wynn, a 23-year-old who had disappeared from Dallas 2 years earlier. When she was found wandering barefoot along a highway in Missouri, she was malnourished, disoriented, and terrified. When questioned, she revealed fragments of her ordeal. She remembered being drugged. She remembered waking up in a dimly lit basement. And she remembered the camera, always clicking, always capturing her fear. But the most haunting part was what she said about the man behind the lens. He never spoke. Not once. He just watched me, as if I wasn't a person, but a prop. Rachel's account confirmed the stage theory. Victims weren't chosen randomly, they were cast into roles. But her survival raised new questions. Why let her live? Was she an escapee, or was her release intentional, part of the performance? The pattern deepens. With Rachel's help, agents attempted to reconstruct details of the basement. She remembered the sound of trains in the distance, the faint smell of oil, and a specific sound, a bell that chimed at regular intervals. Investigators mapped train routes, factories, and churches across 3 states. Astonishingly, the details narrowed potential locations to just 6 possible sites. But before they could act, another Polaroid surfaced. This one showed a man sitting in what appeared to be a church pew, his hands bound, his head bowed. The chilling part was not the victim, it was what was written on the back of the photo. Your turn. The handwriting matched all the others. But this time, the Polaroid wasn't left in a random car. It was delivered directly to the desk of Agent Cross. The breaking point. At this stage, Agent Cross became obsessed. He stopped sleeping, pored over every detail of the case, and started connecting dots no one else could see. Cross noticed something overlooked for years: the victims in the Polaroids weren't strangers. They were linked, subtly, through overlapping connections, distant relatives, co-workers, people who had crossed paths in ways so minor they almost went unnoticed. It was as if the photographer had been studying not just random individuals, but entire networks of people, pulling one thread at a time. And if that was true, then the question shifted from who are these victims, to why these victims? Backhand index pointing right at this point. I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think the photographer was targeting people randomly, or do you believe he had a larger message, some twisted moral or story he was trying to tell? Drop your theories in the comments. The false arrest. By mid-2000, pressure on law enforcement reached a boiling point. Communities were terrified, the press was relentless, and politicians demanded results. So when police in Kansas arrested a drifter named Paul Bender, who was found carrying a Polaroid camera and a journal eerily similar to the farmhouse one, many thought the nightmare was finally over. But almost immediately, cracks appeared in the case. Paul was erratic, mentally unstable, and while he admitted to taking disturbing photos, none of them matched the photographer's signature style. The final blow came when, just days after Paul's arrest, another abandoned car appeared along Route 75. Inside was a Polaroid. And this time, the victim in the photo was a young boy, no older than 10. Paul couldn't have staged it. He was already in custody. Which meant the real photographer was still out there, watching, laughing at the chaos. The countdown tightens. By now, the sequence of numbers, 4, 8, 12, 16, had taken on terrifying urgency. The FBI realized they were rapidly approaching the 12th Polaroid in the timeline. If the pattern held, something catastrophic was about to happen. The 12th Polaroid finally surfaced in August 2000. It showed a large crowd, blurry and indistinct, as if photographed from a distance. Scrawled on the back were just 2 words. Final rehearsal. If the earlier Polaroids were scenes, this one suggested the next would be the grand performance, the final act. And worse, it implied that this act would not involve just one victim, but many. The case had shifted from isolated disappearances to the looming threat of a mass event. Communities across 3 states lived in fear, gathering in smaller groups, avoiding public places, wondering if they were part of the audience the killer was addressing. Investigators scrambled to predict where the photographer would strike, but the truth was slipping further from their grasp. And then, in a cruel twist, the 13th Polaroid arrived. This time, it wasn't found in a car, a lockbox, or a motel. It was mailed directly to a local news station. The photo showed dozens of people sitting in a theater, bound, gagged, and facing the stage. But the stage was empty. And the caption on the back read, "Curtain rises soon." The theater Polaroid. When that 13th Polaroid surfaced at the local news station, showing dozens of bound and gagged people inside a theater, the FBI went into emergency mode. The image was horrifying not only because of what it depicted, but because it suggested something investigators had feared from the start: the photographer wasn't escalating toward a single victim. He was escalating toward a performance with an entire audience of captives. The chilling caption on the back, "Curtain rises soon," only reinforced the sense of inevitability. But the biggest problem was this: no one had reported dozens of people missing at once. So who were these supposed victims? Were they staged actors? Or had an entire group of people been abducted without raising alarm? The missing church group. Within days, a terrifying link surfaced. In Arkansas, a church group of 24 members had failed to return from a weekend retreat. Their bus was found abandoned at a rest stop just outside Fort Smith. The Polaroid matched perfectly. The victims bound in the theater seats were wearing the same clothes last seen on the missing parishioners. It was official. The photographer had staged his largest act yet, and this time, he wasn't hiding a single victim in a basement. He had an entire congregation under his control. The race against the clock. The FBI poured every resource into finding the theater. Analysts examined the architecture in the Polaroid, the shape of the seats, the pattern of the curtains, even the type of exit signs glowing faintly in the background. The details suggested an old, possibly abandoned theater built before the 1950s. Cross-referencing historical records, investigators narrowed it down to just 7 possible locations across Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Kansas. But with the countdown pointing toward the 16th Polaroid as the final act, they knew time was running out. The chilling broadcast. Then, something happened that no one could have predicted. Late one night, a local TV station in Kansas had its signal hijacked. Viewers tuning in for the nightly news were horrified to see a grainy, black and white broadcast of the missing church group, bound in the theater seats, illuminated under harsh stage lights. For 90 seconds, the camera panned across their terrified faces. And then, a voice, distorted and mechanical, spoke a single line. "You've been watching all along." The feed cut out. Panic spread across the 3 states. The broadcast was replayed endlessly on every news outlet. Parents pulled their children from schools. Churches emptied their pews. People locked their doors and refused to leave their homes. The photographer had successfully transformed his performance into a public spectacle, and everyone was now part of the audience. The trap in Wichita. Days later, investigators got a tip about one of the possible abandoned theaters in Wichita. A SWAT team stormed the building, prepared for the worst. Inside, they found rows of empty seats, but in every single seat was a mannequin, each bound and gagged exactly like the victims in the Polaroids. On the stage sat a single Polaroid camera. And taped to it was a note that read, "You don't know the difference between props and people." The chilling realization hit the task force. They were being manipulated at every step. The photographer wasn't just staging murders, he was staging them. The return of Henry Miles. Just when things couldn't get stranger, the missing FBI analyst, Henry Miles, resurfaced. He stumbled into a police station in Tulsa, bruised, exhausted, and terrified. According to Henry, he had been abducted months earlier and forced to work for the photographer, cataloging photos, organizing them, and even sending packages. But when asked where the theater was located, Henry froze. His story began to crumble. He contradicted himself repeatedly, giving conflicting details. Finally, one agent pushed him too far, demanding the truth. Henry broke down, screaming, "You don't understand. I was never his prisoner. I was his understudy." The confession rocked the case. Was Henry a brainwashed accomplice? A willing partner? Or simply another victim manipulated into believing he was part of the performance? The 14th Polaroid. Shortly after Henry's reappearance, another Polaroid was delivered, this time to the front steps of FBI headquarters. It showed Henry himself, bound and gagged in the same theater with the church group. The agents were stunned. If Henry had been in the theater all along, then who was the man they had just interviewed? Tests on the Henry in custody revealed nothing unusual. He wasn't an imposter. His fingerprints, his DNA, everything matched. He was Henry. And yet, the Polaroid showed him somewhere else entirely. The agents realized with horror that the photographer had somehow blurred the line between victim and actor so completely that they could no longer trust what was real. The message hidden in music. Investigators finally caught a break when one agent noticed faint music in the background of the hijacked broadcast. After isolating the sound, they identified it as an old hymn, "Nearer, My God, to Thee." Tracing public records, they discovered that one of the circled towns on the original lockbox map had a long-abandoned opera house, once used for both plays and religious services. The task force prepared for a raid. But just hours before they could move in, the 15th Polaroid surfaced. It showed the opera house itself, lit by floodlights, its stage curtain drawn. And the back carried just one word: tomorrow. The stage was set. The countdown was nearly over. The 16th Polaroid, the final act, was about to happen. The FBI scrambled to secure the opera house, but deep down, they knew they weren't in control anymore. The photographer had orchestrated every move, every clue, every discovery, like a conductor leading an orchestra. And as the sun set that night, the opera house sat in eerie silence, its curtain waiting to rise. The only question that remained was this: when the curtain lifts, will anyone survive to tell the story? The opera house raid. On the morning after the 15th Polaroid arrived, the FBI descended on the abandoned opera house circled on the map. The building was massive, its faded red bricks and broken windows giving it a haunted look. The opera house had been closed for decades, the stage long silent, until now. As agents breached the doors, the smell of dust and mildew filled the air. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of empty seats. The stage curtain, heavy and tattered, hung ominously closed. Everyone knew what was behind it. Or at least, they thought they did. With weapons raised, they pulled the ropes and the curtain fell open. What they saw was worse than anything they had imagined. The theater of the damned. On stage sat the missing church group, bound and gagged, arranged in perfect rows like a living tableau. Their eyes blinked rapidly under the harsh floodlights, confirming they were still alive. The agents rushed forward to cut them free, but before they could reach them, a loud click echoed through the theater. A spotlight flickered on, shining not on the captives, but on the balcony above. There, mounted to the railing, was a Polaroid camera on a timer, snapping pictures automatically every few seconds. Next to it, on a stand, was a tape recorder. It clicked on, and that now familiar distorted voice filled the room. The audience has arrived. The curtain has risen. The final act begins. Then, the building shook. A series of hidden charges exploded, plunging the opera house into chaos. The inferno. Smoke filled the room, debris rained from the ceiling, and the agents scrambled to free the captives while alarms blared. Fire spread quickly through the wooden structure, swallowing curtains, ropes, and seats. It was pandemonium. But even in the chaos, the camera on the balcony continued to snap Polaroids, one after another, capturing every desperate moment. By the time the fire department arrived, much of the building had collapsed. Amazingly, 17 members of the church group survived. But 7 perished in the flames, along with 2 agents. And through it all, the photographer was nowhere to be found. The 16th Polaroid. After the smoke cleared, investigators combed the ruins. In the rubble of the balcony, they found the Polaroid camera. Inside was a single undeveloped photograph, the last in the countdown. When processed, it showed the opera house engulfed in flames, the victims struggling, the agents rushing toward them. The caption on the back read, "The audience applauds." This was the 16th Polaroid, the final act. And just like that, the countdown was complete. The aftermath. In the weeks that followed, the FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in U.S. history. They tracked leads across state lines, interrogated copycats, and scoured every inch of evidence. But the photographer had vanished, leaving behind only ashes, questions, and trauma. Rachel Wynn, the survivor from earlier, gave a chilling statement in the wake of the Opera House fire. "You don't understand. It was never about us. We weren't the actors. We weren't even the victims. We were the props. The real performance was us being watched." Her words echoed what many investigators feared: the photographer wasn't creating horror for himself. He was creating it for us. Theories that haunt. Over the years, theories about the photographer multiplied. Some believe he was a former theater director, staging his crimes like plays. Others argue he was part of a cult or network, explaining the multiple states involved. But the most chilling theory is the simplest, that he was just one man with absolute control over his stage, a man who needed no recognition, only the knowledge that he had turned reality itself into his performance. Even more disturbing, some investigators point out that the Opera House fire was the final act in the countdown of 16 photos. But what if that wasn't the end at all? What if it was only the end of Act 1 in a larger, unseen play? The unsettling discovery. 5 years after the Opera House fire, a janitor cleaning out an abandoned motel in Oklahoma found something wedged beneath a floorboard. It was a Polaroid. The image showed an empty stage, the curtain drawn. On the back were 3 words. "Intermission is over." The FBI has never officially confirmed this discovery, but rumors of it persist to this day. The case remains unsolved. The photographer was never caught, never identified, never even narrowed down to a clear suspect. Survivors still live with nightmares, families still grieve, and investigators still ask the same question that haunted them from the very first Polaroid found in that abandoned car. Were we watching a killer document his crimes, Or were we all unwilling audience members in a performance that still isn't finished? If this story chilled you as much as it did me, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I bring you mysteries like this, always. And tell me in the comments, what do you think? Did the photographer stop after the opera house fire, or is the curtain about to rise again?